The last week I worked there, I pulled up the camera archive for a room that didn't exist anymore, and the timestamp said it was recording live. And there I was on the screen, me, in my gray coveralls, standing in that room at that exact minute, except I was standing in the surveillance office watching the monitor. And I had never in my life set foot in the room. I was watching myself stand in. And that was the moment I understood that the cameras weren't showing me where things were. They were showing me where things were kept. You have to understand what floor maintenance at a casino actually is, because people hear maintenance and think mops. It's more than that, and it's less than that. I ran the overnight crew that kept the gaming floor running, the machines, the carpet, the lights, the little brass rails, the 10,000 small broken things a floor full of drunk gamblers generates between 2 and 6 in the morning. But the real part of the job, the part that mattered, was that I had access. I had the keys and the badges and the run of the building in the dead hours when the pit was thin and the cameras watched empty aisles. A casino is the most watched building on earth, more cameras than a prison. Every inch covered. The eye in the sky that never blinks, and the floor maintenance super moves through all of it, all night, invisible in gray coveralls. The one man the cameras are trained to ignore because he's supposed to be there. My name is Wyatt Larson, and I ran overnight floor maintenance at the Silver Republic Casino in Reno for 6 years. And for about 4 of them, I was stealing. And I'm going to tell you that up front because the stealing is why the room got me. And a man who leaves out the part where he had it coming isn't telling you the truth. He's telling you a story where he's the victim. And I'm done with that story. I'm going to lay this out straight, in order. And you can decide at the end what I was, a thief who saw something, or a thief the building finally collected on. Let me start with the skim, because it's where I have to start, and because it's how I ever noticed the room at all. I want to be plain about what I was doing, because it matters that it was small, and it matters that I told myself it was nothing. I wasn't robbing the vault. I was running a coin and ticket skim off the machines during service when a slot jammed or a ticket printer fouled and I opened the machine to fix it. There were ways, if you knew the floor and the cameras and the timing, to walk a little off the top. Voucher tickets that never got logged. A jammed hopper you cleared and pocketed a handful from. Small, steady. A few hundred a night some nights, split with a pit guy named Corso, who covered the paperwork. And a surveillance tech named Bellamy, who blinded the right cameras at the right minutes for a cut. 3 of us. 4 years. Nobody got hurt, I told myself. The house steals from everybody. I'm just taking a little back. And every man who's ever skimmed has said those exact words, and they were as much a lie in my mouth as in anyone's. The whole thing ran on the cameras. That was the key to all of it. Bellamy in surveillance could pull a camera into a maintenance loop, put it on a repeating clip of an empty aisle for the 4 or 5 minutes I needed to work a machine dirty. And to anyone watching, the aisle just looked quiet. The eye in the sky blinked, exactly when we needed it to, and never at any other time. That was the arrangement. That was how you steal from the most watched building on earth. You don't beat the cameras. You own a few of them for a few minutes at a time. The first thing that went wrong was a camera that wouldn't loop. It was a Tuesday, slow, and I had a machine picked out on the east floor. And I radioed Bellamy for the blind. And he came back after a second sounding funny. He said the camera on that aisle wouldn't take the loop. It wouldn't hold the empty clip. Every time he pushed the maintenance loop to it, the feed snapped back to live within a few seconds, like the camera was refusing to look away. He tried 3 others nearby. Same thing. A whole cluster of cameras on the east floor, near the old part of the building, that would not be blinded, that snapped back to live no matter what he fed them, like they'd decided they were going to watch that stretch of floor and nothing was going to make them stop. "Never seen it," Bellamy said over the radio. And Bellamy had been in that surveillance room 11 years. "It's like they're stuck watching." I moved my work to another aisle that night and thought nothing of it. Equipment gets old, cameras glitch, you root around it. That's maintenance. I didn't write it down. And I didn't tell Corso. And that was the first thing I swallowed. And I know now that the first thing you swallow in a place like that is the one that's already got its hook in you before you feel the sting. I need to tell you about the Silver Republic because the building is most of this. And it's an old building pretending to be a new one. The front of it was new, the new tower, the new floor, LED and chrome, built in the 90s over the top of the original. But underneath and behind, the old casino was still there. The Silver Republic had opened in 1962, and the 60s bones of it were still in the building, walled off and built around and repurposed. There was old back-of-house that nobody used, sealed corridors, a whole disused wing on the east side where the original high-limit rooms had been, that the new floor plan had swallowed and forgotten. Floor maintenance knew that old part of the building the way nobody else did, because we were the ones who went into the sealed corridors to chase a pipe or a conduit. And it was cold back there. And it was quiet, in a way a casino is never supposed to be quiet. And everybody on my crew knew you did the East Wing calls in pairs and got out quick. The same way I imagine every old building has a part the staff learns to hurry through. There was one room back there in particular. The old high-limit salon, the 60s original. The room where the real money had been played when the Silver Republic was the finest carpet in Reno. It had been sealed off in the 90s remodel, walled up, taken off the floor plan. It didn't exist anymore on any drawing I had. But it was back there, behind a false wall in the east corridor, a room that had been the beating heart of the old casino and was now a bricked-up cavity in the building that the new blueprints pretended wasn't there. And the cameras that wouldn't blind the cluster on the east floor were the cameras nearest that sealed room. The crew that season was me, and a younger guy named Renfro, who was learning the floor and reminded me of myself before I got dirty, and a couple of others who rotated. The surveillance side was Bellamy, my partner in the skim, up in the dark room with the wall of monitors. The pit was Corso, and the surveillance manager, the man who ran the Eye in the Sky officially, was a company man named Thorne who worked days and didn't know Bellamy was blinding cameras for me, or if he knew he was getting his own cut through a channel I never saw. That was the whole apparatus that mattered. Me on the floor, Bellamy in the dark room, Corso in the pit, and an old sealed heart of a building on the east side that a cluster of cameras had decided to watch and would not stop watching. I didn't tell Renfro anything because Renfro was clean and I wanted him to stay clean and off my operation. I didn't tell Corso about the stuck cameras because it didn't touch the money. I told myself it was Bellamy's problem, a surveillance glitch, not mine. That was true. It wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth is that some part of me had already gone cold about those east floor cameras, and I did not want to look at the reason. And not looking is a thing I was very good at by then. 4 years into taking a little off the top and calling it nothing. The second thing that went wrong is the thing that made me stop being able to call it a glitch. And it happened in the dark room, and Bellamy showed it to me himself. He called me up to surveillance one night, off the radio, just said, "Come up." And when I came up, he had the door locked, and he was pale in the monitor light. Bellamy was not a nervous man. You don't blind cameras for a skim crew for 4 years if you're nervous. But he had one monitor pulled up big, and he pointed at it, and he said, "Tell me what room that is." It was a high-limit salon. Green baize tables, a roulette wheel, low gold light, men in 60s suits and women in 60s dresses, a crowded room, a full house, chips stacked, a game going. A beautiful old room, full of people playing. "That's a movie," I said. "You pulled a movie feed." "It's camera 41, Bellamy said. "East Wing. It's a live feed off a camera in this building, right now." "There's no camera in the East Wing that shows a room like that. That's the old salon. That's sealed. That's bricked up. There's nothing back there but—" "I know what's back there. I've got the same blueprints you've got." He was very quiet. "Camera 41 is one of the cluster that won't blind. It's mounted in the east corridor, pointed at the false wall where the old salon used to be. It should show a corridor and a wall. That's what it shows in the daytime. But sometime after 2 in the morning, every night this week, it stops showing the wall." He tapped the screen, and it shows this, the room, behind the wall, full, a game going, 60 years ago. And I stood in that dark room and looked at a live feed of a bricked-up salon full of people who'd have been old or dead for decades, playing cards under gold light in a room that didn't exist. And the cold that had been sitting in me about those cameras came all the way up. And I did the thing I did, the thing I always did. I built a reason. Bad camera. Old analog feed picking up interference. A tape loop wired wrong somewhere in the ancient conduit. An old surveillance recording from the 60s bleeding onto a live channel. "There are 100 technical reasons a camera might show an old image," I said. And Bellamy said, "Then explain the clock." There was a clock on the wall of the salon in the feed. An old starburst clock, the kind from the 60s. And it read the current time. To the minute. I watched the second-hand sweep, and I checked it against my own watch. And the clock in the 60-year-old room full of dead gamblers read the exact live current time, sweeping second by second, right now, tonight, in a room that had been bricked up for 30 years. "It's not an old recording," Bellamy said. "It's now. Whatever's in that room, it's happening now. The camera's watching a game that's still going on. It never stopped. They walled up the room, and the game just kept going. And the camera won't look away because—" He stopped. And then he said the thing that turned it into a shape. "Because it's the only camera that can still see them. And they know it's watching. Look." And on the feed, one of the men at the table, an old money type in a sharp, dark suit. A big man, the kind of man who owns the room he's in, looked up. From the table, up, at the camera, right into the lens, right at us in the dark room, watching. And he smiled, and he lifted one hand off his stacked chips, and he beckoned. Slow, 2 fingers, come in. The way a pit boss waves a high roller to an open seat. "There's a place at the table. Come in and play." Bellamy killed the feed. His hand was shaking on the switch, and neither of us said anything for a while. And then Bellamy said, "I'm not pulling that camera up again." And I said, "Okay," and I went back down to the floor. And I did not work a machine dirty that night. And I did not tell Corso. And that was the second thing I swallowed. And it did not go down at all. It sat in my chest like a swallowed coin. I have to tell you what the room was, because I figured it out over the next weeks, piece by piece. The way you figure out a thing you'd give anything not to understand. And it's tied to what I was, which is why it got me, and not somebody clean. I went looking. That's the thing about being floor maintenance. I could go anywhere. And I had the old files, the pre-remodel records that had been boxed and forgotten in the same back-of-house nobody used. And I found the story of the old high-limit salon. And it was a Reno story, an old one. The kind the new corporate casino didn't put in the brochure. In 1962, the year it opened, the Silver Republic was mob money, the way half of Reno and all of Vegas was then. And the high-limit salon was where the real business happened. Not just gambling, skimming. The original skim, the big one, the one the whole racket ran on. The count room and the high-limit salon were where the owners took the house's own money off the top before it was ever reported. Cash out the back door, the skim that built the mob's empire. That salon was the heart of a machine for taking a little off the top of everything, forever, untaxed, unrecorded, unseen. It was a room built for exactly one purpose: to keep what it took off the books in the dark, where no eye could see. And a man had died in there. 1962, opening year. A dealer or a counter, somebody on the inside who'd been skimming the skim, taking off the top of the men who took off the top, and they'd found out. And they'd handled it the way that money handled things then. And it had happened in that salon. And it had been made to disappear the way everything in that room disappeared. Off the books, unseen, kept. And the room had gone on. Decades of the skim ran through it. And when the new owners walled it up in the 90s, they didn't exercise anything. They didn't clear anything. They just bricked over a room that had spent 30 years being a machine for keeping stolen things in the dark, with everything it had ever kept still inside it. And here is what I understood. Standing in the back of house with a box of old files and the cold coming off the sealed east wall, the room keeps. That's its nature. That's what it was built and used to be for 30 years. That's what got branded into its bones. It keeps what's taken off the top. It keeps the skim. It keeps the man who died skimming the skim. At the table, in the game, forever. Because he was taken off the top, and the room keeps what's taken. And the game never stopped, because a machine for keeping doesn't stop. It just gets walled up and keeps in the dark. And the one camera that can still see it watches because the room needs a witness a-keeping, isn't complete without someone to see it kept. And it beckons, come in and play, because it's looking for the one thing that room has always run on. Another man who takes a little off the top, another skimmer, another thief to take a seat at the table and be kept. And I was a thief. I'd been taking a little off the top of that exact building for 4 years. I was of every soul who worked the Silver Republic. The one man whose whole nightly practice was the thing that room was built to keep. The room wasn't beckoning to Bellamy. Bellamy just blinded cameras for a cut. The room was beckoning to me. It had found, after 30 years walled up in the dark, a man doing on its floor the exact thing it existed to keep. And it wanted me at the table. And the stuck cameras and the live feed and the beckoning hand were all one thing. The house calling its own kind of debt. Off the books, in the dark, the way it always had. I want to be honest about Bellamy, because this is the part where I could have done right and didn't. And my sin here isn't cowardice. It's the thing it always was with me. It's greed. Because here's what I did when I understood the room wanted a skimmer. I did not stop skimming. That's the thing. A braver man might have run. A better man would have quit and confessed and taken his lumps. What I did was, I got careful. And careful for me meant selfish, meant cold arithmetic. And I'm going to lay it out because it's the truest ugly thing in this account. I figured the room wanted a thief. Fine. There were 3 of us. Me, Bellamy, Corso. And I figured I actually thought this, in these words, up in my own head, that a room looking for a skimmer to keep didn't necessarily need me, specifically. It needed a skimmer. And Bellamy was a skimmer too, the surveillance side of it. And Bellamy was the one who worked in the dark room with the feed. Bellamy was the one the cameras were closest to. Bellamy had already seen the room and been beckoned. So I did the coldest thing. I kept skimming, and I let Bellamy keep running the blinds for me. And when he said he wanted out, wanted to shut it down after what he'd seen, I talked him into a few more weeks, just till the end of the quarter. Don't leave me hanging. We're so close to enough to walk away clean, because as long as Bellamy was up in that dark room with the feed and the beckoning hand, and his own dirty hands, the room had a skimmer closer to it than me. And I told myself, without ever quite saying it, that if the room was going to take a thief, better the thief in the dark room than the thief on the floor. That's it. That's what I am. I did to Bellamy exactly what I'd done to the machines for 4 years. I took a little off the top of him, off his safety, to pad my own. And I called it, "Don't leave me hanging." And it worked for a while, the way skimming always works for a while. I kept my head down on the floor, and I let Bellamy sit up in the dark room. And I did not go near the east wing, and the weeks went by. And I told myself I'd walk away at the end of the quarter with enough, and never think about that room again. And then one night, in the dead middle of the shift, 3:10 in the morning, my radio crackled, and it was Bellamy's voice, up in surveillance. And he said, "Wyatt, come up. You need to see this. Camera 41, it's the wall's open. The false wall. It's open on the feed. The room's open, and there's an empty seat at the table, and the guy in the suit is..." And then the radio went to a hiss. And under the hiss I heard, faint through Bellamy's open mic, the sound of a roulette wheel spinning, and chips and low gold-lit voices, and a room full of people, close, right there in the dark surveillance room with Bellamy. And then Bellamy's mic cut off, and I ran for the stairs, whatever else I am. When it was Bellamy up there, because I'd talked him into staying, I ran. And I want to be clear that I ran toward it, up 4 flights to the dark room. Because for once in 4 years, I understood that a thing I'd done to save myself had landed on somebody else. And I could not do the not looking anymore. But I didn't know yet what I'd find when I got to that surveillance room. And neither do you. And that's where I have to stop the first part of this. Because what was in the dark room when I got the door open is the part I've never told anyone. And I need to tell it slow and get it exactly right. I got the surveillance door open at 3:13 in the morning, and the dark room was empty. And I want to tell you exactly what empty meant, because it's the thing that finally broke my 4 years of building reasons. Bellamy wasn't there. His chair was pushed back from the console, turned like a man stands up out of it in a hurry. His coffee was going cold. His radio was on the desk, mic keyed open, still hissing, which is why I'd heard the wheel and the chips, and the voices through it. The mic was live and picking up sound from somewhere. And the somewhere wasn't the dark room, because the dark room was silent, except for that hiss. His badge was on the floor, and the wall of monitors, 40-some screens showing the whole floor, every aisle and pit and cage of the Silver Republic. In the dead hours, every one of them was black. Dead. Off. Except one. Camera 41. East wing. Filling the whole main monitor, bright gold in the dark room. And on it was the salon. The old high-limit room. Full, a game going, low gold light, 60 years deep. And the false wall was open on the feed. I could see it. The corridor opening into the room. The brick peeled back like it had never been bricked at all. And there was the table. And the man in the sharp, dark suit at the head of it. The big man, the one who owned the room. And there was an empty seat at the table, pulled out, waiting. And in the seat next to the empty one, at the table, in that room, under the gold light, 60 years back and right now at once, sat Bellamy. He was in his own clothes. His surveillance polo, his lanyard, the clothes he'd been wearing when I saw him an hour before. He was sitting at the table in the sealed room on the feed, and he had chips in front of him, a stack of them, and he was playing. I watched him place a bet, watched his hand move the way I'd watched his hand move 1,000 times on a keyboard. And he was not struggling, and he was not screaming, and he did not look afraid. He looked like a man who'd found a seat at a good table. He looked comfortable. And that was worse than screaming. That was so much worse. Because I understood in that moment that the room hadn't dragged Bellamy anywhere. Bellamy had gone. Bellamy had been beckoned, come in and play, and Bellamy had gone up out of his chair and through a wall that opened for him, because he was the right kind of man, a skimmer, a man who took a little off the top. And he'd sat down at the table because that's where men like us belong, in a room that keeps what's taken, and the room had kept him. The man in the dark suit looked up from the table, at the camera, at me, standing in the dark room where Bellamy should have been, watching. And he smiled, the pit boss smile, the welcome smile. And he lifted his 2 fingers off his chips, and he beckoned again. And beside him, the empty seat the one pulled out. Waiting, I understood, was not for Bellamy. Bellamy already had a seat. The empty one was for me. 2 skimmers, 2 seats, 1 filled, 1 waiting. I have to tell you the rule of that room, because I put it together standing there in the dark, and it's the whole shape of what I'd walked into, and it's tied to what I'd been doing for 4 years, which is why I could see it when a clean man couldn't have. The room keeps what's taken off the top. That was its nature from the first, built into its bones by 30 years of being a skim machine, a room where the house's own money came off the top, off the books, into the dark, kept. And it keeps people the same way it kept money. The man who died skimming the skim in '62 was taken off the top and kept at the table. And now the room, walled up and hungry in the dark, keeps looking for more of its own kind. Not everyone, not the clean. It has no use for a clean man. A clean man isn't its currency. It keeps skimmers. It keeps the men who take a little off the top, because they are the thing it was built to keep. And a machine keeps running, the only program it knows. And it doesn't grab. That was the part I finally understood watching Bellamy sit comfortable at the table. It can't grab. It's a room. You have to walk into it. It beckons. It offers a seat. And to a man who's clean, the beckoning is nothing. An old man on a glitchy feed, easy to look away from. But to a man who's dirty, to a skimmer, to a thief who spent years taking off the top and telling himself it's nothing, telling himself he belongs at the big table, telling himself he's owed a seat, to that man, the beckoning is the most natural invitation in the world. Come in and play. There's a place for you here. You're one of us. You've always been one of us. And the dirty man goes, because the room is only offering him the thing he already believes he deserves. It doesn't take you against your nature. It takes you along your nature. That's why it wanted a skimmer. A skimmer walks in on his own feet, because a skimmer already thinks he's earned the chair. Bellamy walked in because Bellamy was dirty, and the room offered him a seat. And some part of Bellamy, the part that had blinded cameras for a cut for 4 years, thought, yeah, there's my seat. I earned that. And the empty chair beside him was mine. Because I was dirtier than Bellamy, I was the floor. The hands-on skim, the original thief of the 3 of us. And the room knew it. The way that money always knows who's really dirty. And it had a seat pulled out and waiting for the worst thief in the building, which was me. And here's the thing that made my skin crawl. The cold arithmetic of it turned back on me. I'd let Bellamy stay in the dark room to keep the room's attention on him instead of me. I'd taken a little off the top of Bellamy's safety, and it hadn't saved me. It had just fed the room a first course. The room didn't want a skimmer. It wanted skimmers, plural, all of us. The whole crew, one seat at a time, because a skim is never one man. A skim is a ring. And the room that kept the skim wanted the whole ring at its table. Bellamy was seated. I was next. And Corso, down in the pit, who'd covered the paperwork for 4 years, Corso was a third dirty man in the building. And there'd be a chair for him, too, when the room got to him. I had not gotten clear by feeding it Bellamy. I'd just shown it there was a ring, and now it wanted all of us. I did not go in. I want to be honest that it wasn't virtue that kept me out. It was that the invitation, for 1 second, worked. I felt it. Standing in the dark room, I felt the pull of that empty chair. Felt the old familiar voice in my own head that had justified 4 years of stealing say, "Go on, sit down. You've earned a seat at the real table. You were always meant for more than gray coveralls and a mop. That's the big room. That's where men like you belong." And I recognized the voice. That was the thing that saved me. I recognized the voice because it was the same voice that had talked me into the skim in the first place. "You're owed. Take a little off the top. You deserve better than this. Nobody's really hurt." It was the exact voice of my own greed, and the room was speaking to me in it. Because that voice was the door. That voice had always been the door. And I'd been walking through it a little further every night for 4 years. And hearing my own greed come out of that gold-lit room, offering me a chair, I felt something I hadn't felt in 4 years, which was disgust, clean disgust, at the voice and at myself for following it so far. And the disgust was stronger than the pull, and I stepped back from the console. I did not sit down. I did not walk toward the feed. I killed the monitor, reached over, and shut off camera 41, and the gold light went out. And the dark room went fully dark. And the hiss on Bellamy's radio stopped. And I stood there in the black with my heart going, and Bellamy gone into a wall, and a chair pulled out for me on the other side of a dead screen. But killing the monitor didn't bring Bellamy back. I knew that. You don't unkeep a thing the room has kept by turning off the camera that sees it. Bellamy was at the table. The room had him. And I had put him there, as surely as if I'd walked him in myself, because I'd talked him into staying when he wanted out, to keep the room's eye off me. I did not run, and I did not confess, and I want to tell you what I did instead, because it's the part where my flaw shows plainest, and I'm not going to hide it. In the morning, Bellamy was a no-show, then a no-call no-show. His car was in the lot. His apartment, when they checked it days later, was untouched, like a man who'd left for work and never come home. The casino ran it as a missing employee, and then the police ran it as a missing person. And there was a stretch where I thought it was going to come apart, because a missing surveillance tech means people look at the surveillance. And if people looked hard at the surveillance, they might find 4 years of blinded cameras and a skim ring with my name at the center of it. And here's what I did with that fear. I did not use it to come clean. I used it to cover the skim. With Bellamy gone, the blinds stopped, and I couldn't work machines dirty anymore. So I stopped skimming not out of conscience, out of necessity, and then I went further. And this is the ugly part. I went into the surveillance system, which I had access to as floor maintenance, and I quietly scrubbed. I pulled the maintenance loop logs that would have shown Bellamy blinding cameras for me. I cleaned the record of my own theft, using the dead man's, the taken man's access, telling myself I was protecting the operation, protecting Corso, protecting myself, when what I was really doing was skimming one last time. taking the truth off the top, off the books, into the dark, so no one would ever see what I'd done. I used the exact skill the room was built to keep hiding what's taken to hide the fact that I'd fed Bellamy to it. I want you to see what that made me. It made me a man who, having gotten his partner kept by a room that keeps thieves, responded by committing one more perfect little theft, stealing the evidence, which is to say, I responded to the room by being more exactly the thing the room wanted. I made myself, in the days after Bellamy vanished, the most kept-worthy man in that building. I don't think that was an accident. I think the room was still working on me, through my own nature. And every dirty thing I did to save myself pulled the empty chair a little closer. I found out the room was still working on me because of Corso. Corso came to me about 2 weeks after Bellamy vanished, and he was rattled, which Corso never was. And he pulled me into a back stairwell, and he said, "You seen the East floor cameras? 41 in that cluster." And I said I stayed off the East floor, which was true. And Corso said, "I've been getting pulled to look at him, on my breaks. I don't even mean to. I find myself up in the surveillance office looking at 41. And there's a room on it, Wyatt, a card room, old. And there's guys at a table, and one of 'em's..." He stopped, and his face did something. "One of 'em's Bellamy. Bellamy's at the table, in the room. And there's this guy in a suit keeps waving me over, like, 'Come sit down.' And I keep finding myself wanting to go find where that room is, like I know the way, like there's a seat. And I understood the room had moved on to Corso. Bellamy seated, me refusing my chair for now. And the room reaching for the third dirty man, beckoning Corso the way it had beckoned Bellamy, offering him a seat, and Corso, dirty. 4 years of covering the paperwork, was starting to feel the pull the way a dirty man does. The invitation that sounds like something you're owed. And here is where I could have saved Corso. And here is what I did. And it's the same thing I did to Bellamy. The same flaw, one more time, and I'm not going to dress it up. I could have told Corso everything. The room, the rule, what happened to Bellamy. That the pull was his own greed talking, and that the only way through it was to refuse the chair the way I had. I could have warned him with the truth, and maybe he'd have held out. But I did the arithmetic instead. Cold, familiar. I thought, the room wants dirty men. Corso is dirty. If the room is reaching for Corso, then it's reaching for Corso and not me, right now, this week. And Corso going to the table would be one more course, one more skimmer kept. And maybe this is the thought, the real one, the worst one. Maybe a room that keeps thieves can be satisfied. Maybe it wanted the whole ring. And once it had the whole ring, once it had Bellamy and Corso, once the skim crew was complete at its table, it would be full, and it would stop, and I could walk away, the one thief who kept his chair empty, and be free. So I did not warn Corso. I told him the cameras were glitchy. Stay off the East floor, don't look at 41. And I let him walk out of that stairwell still feeling the pull, still finding his feet turning toward a room with a seat in it. And I told myself I'd told him enough. Stay off the East floor. That was a warning, wasn't it? And it wasn't. And I knew it wasn't. And I let him go anyway, because some part of me was hoping the room would take him and be done. That's twice. Bellamy and Corso. 2 men I fed to that table to keep my own chair empty. And both times I told myself a version where I wasn't really the one doing it. And both times I was lying. And I've stopped lying now, so here it is. I ran a skim for 4 years, and when the bill came due, I paid it with my partners, one at a time, to keep from paying it myself. That is the man I was, That is what floor maintenance at the Silver Republic made of me, or found in me, and I've never been able to sort out which. Corso stopped showing up 11 days later. His car in the lot, his apartment untouched. A missing pit boss now, on top of a missing surveillance tech, and the casino getting nervous, and the police getting interested, and me scrubbing one more record, taking one more truth off the top and into the dark. The most kept-worthy man in the building, with 2 empty chairs worth of my partners, now seated at a table behind a wall that only opened for men like me. And then the room did the thing that finally turned me. And I have to tell it exactly, because it's the reason there's a part 3 and the reason I'm telling any of this. The night after Corso vanished, I got pulled to the east floor myself. Not by a work order, by my own feet. I want to be precise. I did not decide to go to the east wing. I was doing my rounds on the main floor. And I came back to myself standing in the east corridor in front of the false wall, with no memory of walking there. My ring of keys in my hand. And the wall was open. Not on a feed, in front of me. Actually open. The brick peeled back the way it had looked on camera 41. A corridor of gold light running back into a room that could not exist. And at the end of it, the table, and the man in the dark suit, and Bellamy in his surveillance polo, and Corso in his pit vest. Both of them seated. Both of them comfortable, both of them looking up at me with the easy welcome of men who've been holding your seat. And the man in the dark suit pulled the empty chair out another inch and beckoned. 2 fingers, come in and play. We're all here now, the whole crew. It's not a real game till everyone's at the table. And I felt my foot move toward the room, because the whole ring was in there. And the voice of my greed said that's where you belong. With your crew, at the big table, you are always going to end up here. Sit down. It's warm. It's gold. It's the room you've been skimming your way toward your whole life. And it was right. That was the thing. It was right. I had been skimming my way toward that room for 4 years. Every dirty dollar had been a step down that gold corridor. And now I was 1 step from the chair. And I stopped, 1 step out, because I looked at Bellamy and Corso at the table. Comfortable, kept. And I understood the last piece of the rule. The piece that finally cut through the greed. They weren't happy. They looked comfortable because the room makes you look comfortable, makes the keeping look like belonging. But they weren't there. Their eyes, when I really looked, were the eyes of the man in the dark suit, 60 years dead and playing a game that never ends and never pays out. Because the room doesn't keep you to let you win. It keeps you to keep you, forever, taking a little off the top of your soul. Every hand, a skim with no cash out, an eternity of almost belonging at a table where the game never breaks. That's what the room was offering me. Not a seat at the big table, a permanent skim of me, off the top, into the dark. Kept. And I did the one thing I'd never done in 4 years of stealing. I chose to lose. I stepped back out of the gold corridor, and I said out loud, to the man in the dark suit, to Bellamy, to Corso, to my own greed, I said, I'm not owed a seat. I never was. I stole, and I fed you my partners to keep from paying. And I'm done being the kind of man you keep. I'm not sitting down. I'd rather have nothing than sit at that table. And I turned my back on the open wall, on the whole ring, on the gold light, on the chair pulled out for me, and I walked away down the dark east corridor. And behind me, I heard the room, for the first time, make a sound that wasn't a welcome. A sound like a wheel spinning down to nothing. And I did not look back. And I got out of the east wing. And the wall I checked in the daylight, the wall was bricked shut, solid, like it had never opened. But turning my back on the chair didn't bring Bellamy back. And it didn't bring Corso back. And it didn't undo 4 years. And it didn't make me clean. It just meant I'd refused the last theft. The theft of my own self. At the very end. After I'd already fed the room everyone I could. And that's where the second part of this has to end, one step out of a gold-lit room. My back finally turned on the table, 2 partners kept behind a wall I'd walked them toward. And a choice in front of me about what a thief does after he's finally refused to steal, because the third part is the part where I found out whether a man like me gets to walk away, and what it costs, and what I owed those 2 chairs. And I need to tell it slow and get it exactly right. I quit the Silver Republic the week after I turned my back on the room. And I want to tell you it was because I'd found my conscience. But the truth is, I quit because I was afraid. And the 2 men who ran the Dayside, the surveillance manager, Thorne, and a suit from corporate whose name I never got, had started asking me questions I couldn't scrub my way out of. 2 employees gone in a month, a surveillance tech and a pit boss, both vanished, both with access to the floor, both connected, if anyone looked hard enough, to a maintenance super who'd been on shift both nights and who had, they were beginning to notice, an unusual amount of access to the camera logs. They didn't have it yet, but they were pulling the thread. And I knew where the thread ended, and it ended at me. So I quit before they could pull it all the way, and I told myself I was getting out. And what I was really doing was running the last skim. Taking myself off the top, out the back door, into the dark, before the count came up short. But here is the thing I didn't understand when I quit. And it's the thing that turned this from a story about a haunted room into a story about what I owed. I thought turning my back on the chair had ended it. I thought refusing to sit down meant I'd walked away clean, or as clean as a man like me gets. I thought the room was behind a brick wall, in a building I'd never enter again, with Bellamy and Corso kept at the table forever. A terrible thing, but a finished thing. Sealed, done. Mine to carry, but not mine to fix. I was wrong. And I found out I was wrong about 6 weeks later. And it's the reason I'm telling you all of this, instead of drinking it quiet into the ground the way I meant to. I'd taken a room in a weekly place across town, funny where a man lands, out of one Nevada building and into another. And I was sitting up one night not sleeping, which was every night by then. And my phone rang. And it was a number I didn't know. And I answered it because I answered everything then. Waiting for it to be the police. And it wasn't a voice. It was a room. It was the sound of a room, a wheel spinning, chips, low gold-lit voices, and under it, close, a man breathing. And then a voice I knew. Bellamy's voice, tired and comfortable and wrong, said, "Wyatt, you left your seat empty. That's fine, but you can't leave the count short. You know that better than anybody. You take off the top, the count has to balance. There's 2 chairs filled and 1 empty, and the empty one's got your name on it. And an empty chair is a short count. And you know what happens to a man who leaves the count short." And the line went dead. And I sat there in a rented room across town from a casino I'd quit. And I understood the thing I'd gotten wrong. The thing my whole life of skimming should have taught me and hadn't. You cannot leave a count short. That's the first rule of the skim, the rule that keeps you from getting caught. Whatever you take off the top, the books have to balance. Or somebody notices, or somebody comes. And I had taken myself off the top. I'd refused my chair, walked out, quit, run. But the room's count was short by exactly 1 skimmer. And a room whose entire nature was the skim could not tolerate a short count any more than the motel could tolerate a vacancy. And it was going to balance the books. And the way you balance a short count is you make up the difference. And I was the difference. and it was going to come and get its difference, whether I sat down willingly or not. Turning my back hadn't ended it. It had just made me a short count. And a short count doesn't get to walk away. A short count gets collected. I did the thing I do. For about 2 weeks, I ran. Not physically, where does a man go, but the way I always ran. Into scheming, into the cold arithmetic, into looking for the angle that let me off the top without paying. And I want to lay out the angle I found, because I nearly took it. And it's the last and worst version of the thing I am. The room needed to balance the count. It needed a skimmer in the empty chair. It didn't necessarily need me. It needed a dirty man to make the difference. And I was, God help me, still thinking like a skimmer. And a skimmer, faced with a debt, looks for someone else to hang it on. And I knew where to find dirty men. I knew, from 6 years on that floor, that the Silver Republic was full of small thieves, dealers dumping to friends, cage clerks shorting counts, a dozen little skims running in the dark of any casino at any time. I could, if I wanted, find another dirty man, another skimmer, and I could figure out how to point him at the East Wing, at Camera 41, at the beckoning, the way I'd let Bellamy stay in the dark room and let Corso wander toward the wall. I could feed the room one more thief who wasn't me, balance its count with somebody else's soul, and be free. I actually started to do it. I made a call. I still had one contact on the floor. A dealer I knew was dirty. And I started, in a roundabout way, to set him up to plant the idea, to get him curious about the old East Wing cameras, to walk him toward the chair. That's how far gone I was. 2 partners already at that table because of me. And my answer to being called for the count was to try to skim a third stranger into it. And the thing that stopped me wasn't a vision, and it wasn't conscience arriving like sunrise. It was something smaller and stranger, and it's the closest thing to grace a man like me was ever going to get. It was that I couldn't do it clean. I got the dealer on the phone to plant the hook, and I opened my mouth to say the thing that would start walking him toward that room. And I heard my own voice about to do it, heard the smooth skimmer's voice. Hey, you ever notice the old cameras on the east floor? Funny thing, you should take a look. And I heard, underneath my own voice, the exact cadence of the man in the dark suit. I had become the beckoning. I was doing to this dealer precisely what the room in the suit had done to Bellamy and Corso and me, offering a dirty man a seat he thought he was owed, to keep my own chair empty. I had become the thing that keeps thieves. The room hadn't needed to seat me at its table. It had made me into itself, out here, across town, on a phone. I was doing its work for it. I was its recruiter now. And I hung up. Mid-sentence, I hung up on that dealer, and I sat in the rented room. And I felt the full weight of what I'd been for 4 years, and what I'd been about to become forever. And I understood that there was no angle. There was never going to be an angle. Every angle I found was just the room, working through my own nature, pulling the chair a little closer. The skimmer's whole life is finding the way to not pay. And the room was built out of men who spent their lives not paying. And I could not skim my way out of a debt to the thing that keeps skimmers, because every attempt to skim out of it was one more deposit into it. There was only one thing a man like me had never once done. In 4 years or in 40, pay, full, no skim, no angle, no third party to hang it on. Balance the count myself, with the only currency I had, which was me. But I want to be clear about what pay turned out to mean, because it wasn't what the room wanted. And figuring out the difference is the one thing in this whole account I did right. The room wanted me to sit down. That was its idea of balancing the count, the empty chair filled, the skimmer kept, the difference made up in my soul. Another course at the endless table. And for a while, I thought that was the only way to balance it. And I'll tell you honestly, there were nights in that rented room when I thought about just going back, walking into the East Wing, sitting down, ending the running, being kept. Because at least then it would stop. And at least then I'd have paid. And at least Bellamy and Corso wouldn't be at that table alone. Because of me. That's a seductive thought to a guilty man. That you can pay your debt by joining the people you wronged in their suffering. It feels like justice. It feels like the least you can do. But it's not paying. I worked that out slow, in the rented room. And it's the hardest thing I understand. Sitting down doesn't balance the count. It fills the count. It gives the room exactly what it wants, a third kept thief. 3 souls skimmed forever instead of 2. It doesn't free Bellamy and Corso. It just seats me beside them in the same eternity. The room isn't owed my company. The room is a machine for keeping what's taken off the top. And the way you beat a machine like that is not by feeding it the last thing it's hungry for. It's by closing the books, by making it so there's nothing left to keep, and no count left to balance, by taking the whole skim, all of it, out of the dark and into the light where it can't be kept. Because the room's entire power is that everything it holds is off the books, unseen, in the dark. A thing that's on the books, in the light, witnessed, counted, that can't be skimmed, that can't be kept. The room can only hold what nobody sees. So the way to free Bellamy and Corso and to balance the count without sitting down was to do the one thing a skimmer never does, and the one thing that room had never once suffered in 60 years. I had to put it all on the books. Every dollar I stole, every camera Bellamy blinded, every count Corso covered, the whole 4-year skim and the room, and what it did to 2 men, all of it, out loud, on the record, in the light, witnessed. Confession, yes, but not the kind that's about my soul. The functional kind. The kind that takes a thing that only exists in the dark and forces it into the light where a room built on darkness cannot follow. Because here's the logic. And it's the logic of the skim turned inside out. The room kept Bellamy and Corso because they were taken off the top unrecorded, unseen, off the books, disappeared. That's how it holds people. 2 men who vanished with no explanation, no record, no witness. A surveillance tech and a pit boss written up as missing. Their truth scrubbed, by me, out of the logs. As long as their disappearance stayed off the books, as long as the truth of what happened to them was skimmed into the dark, the way I'd skimmed it, the room could keep them. Because they existed nowhere but at its table. But if I put the truth on the record, if the world knew that Bellamy and Corso were taken by that room, if their disappearance was accounted for, witnessed, counted, on the books, then they weren't off the top anymore. They weren't unrecorded. They weren't the room's private kept secret. They were seen, and a thing that's seen can't be kept in the dark. It wouldn't bring them back to life. I knew that. Whatever the room had done to them behind that wall was done. But it would free them from the keeping, from being the room's forever. Its unrecorded difference, its skim. It would balance the count by putting the count in the light. And it would cost me everything. Because putting the whole skim on the books meant putting me on the books, meant confessing 4 years of theft, meant prison, meant the end of every angle I'd ever have again. The perfect payment for a skimmer. The one debt you can only settle by giving up the very thing that made you a skimmer, which is the dark you operate in. I did it, and I want to tell you how, because the how is the payment. I didn't go to the police first, because a man walking into a station saying a haunted card room took my partners gets a psych hold, not a record. I did it the way it had to be done to actually go on the books, to be counted, to be seen. I went to Thorne, the surveillance manager, and to the corporate suit, the two men who'd been pulling the thread toward me, and I gave them the thread. All of it. I sat in a conference room at the Silver Republic in the daylight, and I laid out the entire skim, my part, Bellamy's part, Corso's part. 4 years, the numbers, the methods, the blinded cameras, the covered counts. Everything I'd spent 6 weeks scrubbing, I unscrubbed. I handed them the logs I'd cleaned and told them exactly what I'd deleted and why. I put the whole skim on the books, on the record, witnessed by the company, and, when the company called them, by the police and by the regulators, the Gaming Control Board, who do not treat a casino skim as a ghost story, who put it in files that exist forever. And then I told them about the room, not as a confession of madness, as part of the record of what happened to Bellamy and Corso. I told them Camera 41 showed a sealed room that shouldn't have a feed. I told them to open the east wing, to break down the false wall, to look at what was behind it, to put it on the record. And Thorne, who was a company man and not a fool, had been watching Camera 41 himself for weeks by then, and had his own reasons to be afraid of it. And he did it. He had the false wall opened, with witnesses, with cameras rolling, in the daylight, on the books. I wasn't there. I was in a holding cell by then, because you don't confess 4 years of casino theft and walk out to lunch. But I heard later, from a lawyer and from a control board investigator, who came to ask me questions with a look on his face I recognized, because it was the look of a man who'd seen something he was going to spend a lot of energy not seeing. Behind the false wall was the old high-limit salon, 60 years sealed, and it was empty of people. But the table was there, the 60s table, green baize, and the chairs, and on the table were chips, and the chips were fresh, and there were 3 drinks, and the drinks were not 60 years old. They were recent, one of them still cold. And in the dust of 60 years on that floor, there were footprints, recent footprints, and 2 of them matched shoes that had belonged to a missing surveillance tech and a missing pit boss. And the investigator told me the board's forensic people had no explanation and had written it up, formally on the record, as undetermined, and filed it in the light, where it would exist forever. And that was the payment. Not my imprisonment, though I got that too and deserved it. The payment was that the room got put on the books. The salon that had spent 60 years keeping what it took off the top. In the dark, unseen, unrecorded, got opened, witnessed, photographed, filed, entered into the permanent record of the Nevada Gaming Control Board, dragged into the light, and counted. And a room whose entire power was darkness could not survive being counted. I'll tell you how I know it worked, because a man doesn't get to just believe a thing like that. He needs a sign, and I got one, though it's not the kind of sign that ends up in a file. The night after the wall was opened, I was in a cell. I couldn't have known, but I've pieced it together since. From what people told me, the East Wing cameras, the cluster that wouldn't blind, that had watched that wall for weeks, went dark. Not glitched, went dark and stayed dark. And when the techs checked them, they found the cameras were fine, the wiring was fine. There was simply nothing to watch anymore. The feed of the impossible room, gone. Camera 41 showing an empty open salon in the daylight, and nothing else, ever again. Whatever had been kept behind that wall, whatever had been running that endless game in the dark, could not run once the room was in the light and on the books. The count was balanced. The skim was over. There was nothing left to keep because everything had been seen. And Bellamy and Corso, they never came back to life. I need to say that plain, because I've made peace with it, and I won't pretend otherwise, for a neat ending. 2 men died, really died, because of a skim I started and a room I fed them to. And no confession brings a dead man back. But they stopped being missing. The board's file lists them now, not as walk-offs, not as men who vanished off the top into nothing, but as accounted for, taken on the record, in a matter formally undetermined but formally recorded. Their disappearance counted, their truth in the light. They're not the room's secret anymore. They're not skimmed. They're seen. And I have chosen to believe, and I go on believing, that being seen was the thing that let them go, that a soul kept off the books in the dark is held, and a soul put on the books in the light is released, even if released only means finally, actually gone instead of forever, terribly kept. I gave them the only thing I had left to give, which was the truth in the light, at the cost of my own dark. It doesn't make it even. Nothing makes it even. But it balanced the count, and the count was the only debt I could actually pay. I did 7 years. I'm out now. I'll never work near a gaming floor again. No. The board saw to that, and I wouldn't anyway. I did the years, and I don't complain about them. They were of everything in this account. The only part I unambiguously earned, and there was a strange rest in serving them. The rest of a man whose books have finally been made to balance, who isn't carrying a short count anymore, who put the whole thing in the light and has nothing left to scrub. The phone never rang again with a room on the other end. The count was paid. So here's the last of it. The closing image, since I've told you everything else true. When they let me out, I had a box of property they give you back. The things you came in with. And in it was my old key ring from the Silver Republic, the master ring, floor maintenance, that I'd never turned in because I'd quit in a panic and then gone to jail. And somewhere in the chaos, it had ended up in my personal effects and gotten booked with me and sat in an evidence bag for 7 years and come back to me on the way out the door. The way the wrong things always survive. I stood in the parking lot of the prison with that ring of keys in my hand. Keys to a casino that had been sold and gutted and rebranded twice over while I was inside. Keys that opened nothing anymore. Doors that didn't exist. A floor that had been torn out. An east wing that had been demolished. A whole building I'd stolen from and been kept worthy in. All of it gone. A ring of keys to nothing. The tools of a skimmer, the access, the run of the building in the dark, all of it dead metal in my hand, in the daylight. And I did the thing I'd have never done. The old me, the me who kept every angle and every access, because you never know. I dropped that ring of keys in the trash barrel by the prison gate. Didn't throw it, didn't make a thing of it. Just opened my hand over the barrel and let it go, a soft jangle and gone. The last of the dark I'd operated in. The access, the keys to the rooms where things get kept, into a barrel, in the light, on my way out the gate, done. And, yes, I walked out into the flat Nevada morning with empty hands, which is the one condition I'd never once been in. In 4 years of skimming or 40 years of looking for the angle empty-handed, holding nothing off the top, nothing scrubbed, nothing kept, nothing owed. A man who finally left the count balanced and walked out carrying 0. That's the whole story. I ran floor maintenance at a Reno casino, and the cameras kept one room, because the room kept what was taken off the top, and it wanted a skimmer, and I was the skimmer. And when the bill came due, I paid it the only way I'd never tried the whole truth. In the light, on the books, at the cost of everything I'd stolen and every angle I'd ever run. The room's in a file now. Bellamy and Corso are in a file now, seen, counted, not kept. And me, I've got empty hands in the daylight, And for the first time in my life, that's exactly what I want to be holding.